Hello, I'm Tim Lynch. I'm the host of Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. We're brought to you live the third Wednesday of every month. If you'd like to call in, please do. Our number here is 617-708-3290. Again, our number is 617-708-3290. We're going to be discussing immigration law. And we have as our guest here today, Murray-Tjan. Did I pronounce that right?
Yes, you did.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And Laura is the director of the Federal Immigration Appeals Project, and we're going to be discussing some issues that she deals with in her practice. So how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Tim. How are you?
I'm pretty good. So you do, you're the director of the Federal Immigration Appeals Project. What is that?
It's an organization that I founded last year, and its focus, its mission is dedicated to pro bono and low bono appellate representation.
Okay, I think we've explained to viewers, pro bono is when lawyers take on a case and don't get paid for it. They just do it out of the goodness of their heart. It's a matter of professionalism. But low bono, that's a new phrase. What's that?
You haven't heard that phrase?
Actually, no.
Immigration attorneys use it all the time. It means that you take the case for a really low fee, that the client really can't afford to pay for the full array of services that you're providing. So you take a very low fee.
So you must do a lot of public interest type of work.
I definitely have the soul of a public interest lawyer. It's definitely in my DNA.
It sounds like it. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what areas of immigration law do you work in?
I focus primarily on three areas, though I will look at anything. My three areas of greatest passion are derivative citizenship law, asylum and refugee law, and then thirdly, the immigration consequences of criminal convictions.
Well,
it's a lot of jargon.
Yes, it is. Let's break that down a little bit. Derivative citizen? What is that?
Derivative citizenship is when a child automatically becomes a U.S. citizen due to his or her parents' naturalization. And the statute has been amended many times over the decades, and the version governs that was in force when you were born.
Okay.
The statute today is much less complex than the statutes from earlier times, but there's still been a lot of litigation around it that I've been involved in.
Well, obviously it's been part of the dialogue in the presidential campaign. So as it stands today, what is the law on that?
If you are a lawful permanent resident of the United States, you're under 18, and one of your parents naturalizes, then you are automatically a U.S. citizen. You don't have to file anything separately. The question that comes up quite often is whether a child claiming citizenship through his father, if that child was born out of wedlock, whether or not the father legitimated the child. So a lot of the litigation is around it. The child has to have been legitimated by the father.
When you say legitimated by the father, what do you mean by that?
Well, that's the problem.
Okay. I thought so.
It's a term of art, and there are multiple statutory provisions that control. And when I tell you what it means, it's completely bizarre.
Okay.
So if you're in a country that has eliminated all distinctions between children born out of wedlock and children born in wedlock, then you are deemed to be automatically legitimated at birth. Obviously, the father has done nothing except live in that country. But there are some countries where marriage is required, and that's the typical requirement, or some other act of claiming the child that's recognized by a court. But generally marriage is what does it, because if all children are equal under the law, there isn't a huge motive generally for having a court recognize your paternity.
You would think so. I mean, I would think that the societal interest in making sure children are part of a family.
Yeah, well, the idea is that you don't want children discriminated against, but in some countries, marriage is just rarer, and people will refer to their partner as husband or wife, even when they're not married, because they view that individual as a lifetime partner. So it's just as serious a relationship. It's just not sanctioned by a church or by the government. But it functions the same way.
Okay. So this is children becoming automatically U.S. citizens through their parents.
Exactly.
What about, we've heard with the San Bernardino case out there, spouses becoming U.S. citizens. How does that work?
They have to go through the regular naturalization process.
So,
Yeah.
and
So
had that changed recently? I would think so.
No,
There you
not
go.
in any way that relates to anything in San Bernardino.
Wow.
The real issue in that case was the fact that she obtained a fiancé visa to come here. So the government has been looking at the process of issuing fiancé visas, even though they're such a tiny fraction of immigrant visas to the U.S., of ways of coming to the U.S. They've focused on it, but not other types of visas. It's an area of concern.
So what would be like the main sources of visas? I would assume just visitation or schooling.
Well, immigrant visas, so when you immigrate as a lawful permanent resident. So when Tashfeen Malik, one of the shooters in San Bernardino, came into this country, the rule is that you have to marry within 90 days of coming here. And after that, you can apply for your green card. But that's less common than individuals applying for immigrant visas to come directly to the U.S., in addition to working visas, student visas, all those other types of visas. The fiancé visa, they come up, but it as a percentage of the whole, it's minuscule.
But I guess it's only because of San Bernardino that all this attention.
Yeah, the government had to focus on fiancé visas and not necessarily other types of visas, simply by virtue of that happenstance, that's how she came here.
Right. So the other area you had mentioned dealt with asylum law, and you had a very long name for it. So what was that again?
So on the form that you apply for asylum, which has to be supplemented obviously by volumes of documents, you can simultaneously apply for withholding of removal, which has the same factors essentially as asylum, but the standard that you have to meet, your burden of proof is higher. So to win asylum, you have to show a reasonable possibility of persecution. But for withholding of removal, you have to show a probability. And what really happens is that the judge has to feel fairly certain of the persecution before withholding of removal is granted. And then Convention Against Torture relief, it's different from both of them in that it has to be, the government has to acquiesce in the treatment, and the treatment has to amount to torture.
So it has to be state-involved torture of its citizens.
Or the state's willful blindness. They know about it and they don't care.
Okay. And the two standards you mentioned, how do they come into play? Why are there two different standards?
Because Congress wanted to
Do
distinguish
it that
between
way.
people.
But how did they
Yeah.
arise with the different standards?
Well, if you have certain types of crimes, you can't get asylum because it's discretionary. So not only do you have to show the reasonable possibility of persecution, but the judge has to believe in the exercise of discretion that you merit that wonderful benefit.
Of citizenship, or at least
Eventually, yes. Because
being-
with asylum, if you win asylum, you can subsequently apply for your green card, and with your green card, you can apply for citizenship.
Okay.
Whereas withholding of removal, it's simply, essentially, tolerance of your being in the United States.
So that's a lower standard
It's a lower benefit.
benefit.
Yeah. If you leave the United States, you've self-deported and you can never come back because they're refraining from deporting you. So you have to apply for withholding of removal if you have certain types of crimes, or if you failed to meet what's called the 1-year filing deadline, meaning that you have to file for asylum within 1 year of your arrival in the United States, or you're automatically dropped into the withholding of removal category.
Okay. So these are people who've committed some sort of crime, or?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Their only crime might have been not applying by the 1-year deadline.
Okay.
And that happens,
All the time.
it happens pretty often because obviously a lot of refugees have experienced trauma. Some of them are dysfunctional, or the reason that they're being persecuted in their home country is they view it as extremely shameful and they don't want to talk about it.
So they might view our government like they view their government, so they're reluctant to approach
Exactly.
governmental authorities.
Yeah, or even think that what they've suffered would qualify them for some sort of benefit because it's so shameful.
And you know, that probably crosses over to LGBTQ issues then.
I would say that that's one of the main reasons, so main grounds for which an immigration judge would waive the 1-year filing deadline, find that there were extraordinary circumstances. Because if you come from a country where the government imprisons you, you're tortured, and in the case of Uganda, potentially executed for being gay, you're not going to think that the US government is going to help you because you're gay. And also, the general source of word-of-mouth information is from the people of the same country. And to those people, being gay is a very bad thing. So you don't talk about it. And as I told you once, I had a client where the immigration judge forgave an 8-year delay. The client had suffered so much in Honduras. He was beaten, he was belittled. His father tortured him, I would say. He beat him severely, threw a gas lamp at him, and he suffered a serious burn and scarring that persists to this day. It would not have occurred to him initially that it would be a good thing to be gay in the United States, and he hid it from people here for years and finally started to talk about it when he was applying for asylum, because he realized that when he talked to people, they weren't revolted, and that people actually viewed it as a protected ground rather than something shameful. So yes, that is a huge hurdle for people who are LGBT